The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling downtown street as Sarah Martinez walked toward the coffee shop, where she planned to meet her college roommate. At 28, she had the quiet confidence of someone who had faced challenges most people couldn't imagine. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore civilian clothes, jeans, a plain t-shirt, and sneakers. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything other than an ordinary woman going about her day. Sarah had recently returned from a classified mission overseas, one of many she had completed as a Navy SEAL. Few people knew about her real profession. The nature of her work required discretion, and she preferred it that way. Being a woman in the SEALs was already unusual enough without drawing additional attention to herself. She had worked twice, as hard as her male counterparts, to prove herself, enduring rigorous training that pushed her physical and mental limits beyond what most people thought possible. As she approached the intersection near the coffee shop, Sarah noticed a commotion ahead. Police cars surrounded a small convenience store, their red and blue lights flashing. Officers were questioning people on the sidewalk, and the area buzzed with tension. Sarah slowed her pace, her training automatically kicking in as she assessed the situation. Years of military service had taught her to be aware of her surroundings at all times. A robbery had occurred just minutes earlier. The suspect was described as a young woman with dark hair, wearing casual clothes and approximately Sarah's height and build. The description was vague enough to match dozens of women in the area, but specific enough to make the responding officers take notice when they spotted Sarah walking nearby. Officer Johnson, a veteran cop with 15 years on the force, spotted Sarah first. His partner, Officer Williams, was newer to the job and eager to prove himself. Both men had been responding to calls all morning, and the pressure to apprehend the robbery suspect was mounting. Their supervisor had made it clear that solving this case quickly was a priority, especially since the convenience store was in a high-profile area of downtown. Sarah continued walking, completely unaware that she had caught the attention of the two officers. She was thinking about her upcoming meeting with her friend Lisa, whom she hadn't seen in months. Lisa had no idea about Sarah's military career, believing instead that Sarah worked for a private security company that required frequent travel. This cover story had served Sarah well over the years, allowing her to maintain normal relationships while keeping her true profession secret. As Sarah reached the corner where the police activity was centered, Officer Johnson stepped forward. His hand rested on his radio as he called out to her. The tone in his voice was authoritative and left no room for misunderstanding. He asked Sarah to stop and show her identification. The request seemed routine enough, but Sarah immediately sensed the underlying suspicion in the officer's demeanor. Sarah complied politely, reaching slowly for her wallet while keeping her hands visible. Her military training had taught her how to interact with law enforcement in a way that would de-escalate any potential tension. She understood that sudden movements or defensive behavior could quickly turn a simple interaction into something more serious. However, when Sarah produced her identification, it only showed her civilian information. There was nothing on her driver's license or other documents that would indicate her military status. The address listed was her apartment in the city, and her occupation was listed simply as consultant, another part of her cover identity. Officer Williams, the younger of the two policemen, studied Sarah's identification carefully. Something about the situation didn't feel right to him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what was bothering him. Perhaps it was the way Sarah carried herself, with a straight posture and alert eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Or maybe it was the calm way she had responded to their request for identification, showing none of the nervousness or irritation that most civilians displayed when stopped by police. The description of the robbery suspect continued to echo in Officer Johnson's mind. Young woman, dark hair, casual clothes, medium height. Sarah matched every detail they had been given. The timing was also suspicious. She had been walking in the area shortly after the robbery occurred, and she seemed to be moving away from the scene of the crime. As more police units arrived at the scene, the pressure to make an arrest intensified. The convenience store owner was waiting to identify the suspect, and witnesses were growing impatient. Officer Johnson made a decision that would soon prove to be a significant mistake. Based on the physical description and Sarah's presence in the area, he determined there was enough probable cause to detain her for questioning. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the officer's suspicions were focusing on her. She knew that revealing her true identity as a Navy SEAL would require verification through military channels, a process that could take hours or even days. The nature of her recent missions meant that even confirming her military status might be complicated by security clearances and classified information. The situation was about to escalate in ways that none of them could have anticipated. What had started as a routine police investigation was about to become an incident that would test everyone involved and ultimately reveal the extraordinary truth about the woman they had stopped on the street. Officer Johnson's radio crackled to life with an update from dispatch. The convenience store owner had provided additional details about the robbery suspect, including the fact that she had a distinctive tattoo visible on her forearm. Johnson glanced at Sarah's arms, noticing that her sleeves covered most of her skin, but he could see what appeared to be the edge of some kind of marking near her wrist. The pressure to solve the case was mounting, and Johnson felt confident that they had found their suspect. Sarah's calm demeanor, which should have been reassuring, instead struck him as suspicious. In his experience, innocent people were usually more nervous when stopped by police. Sarah's composed behavior seemed almost too controlled, as if she was hiding something. Without warning, Officer Johnson reached for his handcuffs. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise as she realized what was about to happen. She had been in dangerous situations around the world, facing armed enemies and life-threatening circumstances, but being falsely arrested on a city street felt surreal and deeply frustrating. Sarah raised her hand slightly, a gesture meant to show compliance, but Officer Williams misinterpreted the movement as potential resistance. His training kicked in, and he stepped forward to assist his partner. Within seconds, Sarah found herself being turned around and handcuffed, her rights being read to her in a mechanical voice that seemed to echo off the surrounding buildings. The handcuffs clicked into place with a finality that made Sarah's stomach drop. She had worn restraints before during survival training, but this was different. These cuffs represented a fundamental misunderstanding that threatened to spiral out of control. Her mind raced through her options, all of which seemed limited and potentially problematic. A small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk, drawn by the police activity and the unusual sight of a woman being arrested in broad daylight. Some people pulled out their phones to record the incident, while others whispered among themselves about what might have happened. Sarah felt exposed and vulnerable in a way that was completely foreign to her. The convenience store owner, Mr. Chen, approached the officers with a mixture of eagerness and uncertainty. He had been robbed twice in the past year and was desperate to see the perpetrator caught. When he looked at Sarah, however, something didn't feel quite right. The woman who had robbed his store had seemed more frantic, more desperate. This woman appeared calm and collected, even while being arrested. Officer Johnson asked Mr. Chen if he could identify Sarah as the robbery suspect. The store owner hesitated, squinting at Sarah's face and trying to remember the details of the incident that had occurred less than an hour earlier. The stress of being robbed had affected his memory, and he found himself second-guessing what he remembered about the suspect's appearance. Meanwhile, Sarah was weighing her options carefully. She could demand to speak with her military liaison, but doing so would require revealing classified information about her identity and recent whereabouts. The missions she had been involved in were sensitive, and exposing her military status could compromise ongoing operations or put other service members at risk. Officer Williams noticed that Sarah seemed to be thinking deeply about something, her brow furrowed in concentration. To him, this looked like the behavior of someone trying to come up with a story or an alibi. He mentioned his observation to his partner, further reinforcing their belief that they had apprehended the right person. The situation grew more complicated when Sergeant Rodriguez arrived at the scene. As the supervising officer, she was responsible for ensuring that proper procedures were followed and that the arrest was justified. She looked at Sarah, then at the two officers who had made the arrest, and asked for a summary of the evidence. Officer Johnson explained the circumstances. Sarah matched the physical description, was in the area at the right time, and appeared to have a tattoo that could match the witness description. When pressed for more details, however, the evidence seemed thinner than it had initially appeared. The physical description was generic, the timing was circumstantial, and they hadn't actually seen the tattoo clearly. Sarah listened to the officers discuss her case as if she weren't standing right there. The frustration was building inside her, but her training kept her emotions in check. She knew that losing her temper or becoming confrontational would only make things worse. Instead, she focused on breathing steadily and thinking through her next moves. The crowd on the sidewalk was growing larger, and some people were becoming vocal about what they perceived as police overreach. Comments about racial profiling and aggressive law enforcement tactics began to circulate among the onlookers. The officers were aware of the growing scrutiny and felt pressure to either proceed with the arrest or release Sarah. Quickly, Sergeant Rodriguez made the decision to transport Sarah to the police station for further questioning and a formal identification process. She felt that the evidence was too thin for a solid arrest, but the circumstances were suspicious enough to warrant investigation. This decision would soon prove to be fateful, as it would lead to an encounter that none of them could have anticipated. As Sarah was escorted toward the police car, she caught sight of her reflection in a storefront window. The woman looking back at her appeared ordinary, unremarkable even. No one could tell by looking at her that she had completed missions in some of the world's most dangerous locations, that she had saved lives and served her country with distinction. The disconnect between her appearance and her reality felt more pronounced than ever. The ride to the police station was quiet, with Sarah lost in thought about how to handle the situation without compromising her military obligations. She knew that the truth would eventually come out, but she worried about the complications that might arise from this case of mistaken identity. What she didn't know was that the resolution would come from an unexpected source, and in a way that would surprise everyone involved. The police station buzzed with its usual midday activity as Sarah was brought through the front doors. Officers moved between desks handling paperwork, phones rang constantly, and the familiar sounds of law enforcement filled the air. Sarah had been in police stations before, but always in her official capacity as a military liaison or during joint operations. Being brought in as a suspect was an entirely different experience. Detective Maria Santos was assigned to handle Sarah's case. Santos had been with the department for 12 years and had developed a reputation for thorough investigations and fair treatment of suspects. When she saw Sarah being brought in, something immediately struck her as unusual. The woman didn't carry herself like a typical robbery suspect. There was a discipline in her posture, a way of scanning the room that reminded Santos of military personnel she had worked with in the past. Sarah was processed through the standard booking procedures. Her fingerprints were taken, her photo was captured from multiple angles, and her personal belongings were cataloged and stored. Throughout the process, she remained cooperative but quiet, answering questions directly without offering additional information. Her behavior was professional, almost businesslike, which only added to Detective Santos's growing curiosity about her background. In the interrogation room, Detective Santos spread out the case files and prepared to question Sarah about the convenience store robbery. The room was small and windowless, with fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows on the walls. Sarah sat calmly in the metal chair, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Her composure was remarkable for someone facing serious criminal charges. Santos began with standard questions about Sarah's whereabouts during the time of the robbery. Sarah provided clear, factual answers about her morning routine and her planned meeting with her friend Lisa. Her story was consistent and detailed, but it was also generic enough that it could have been rehearsed. Santos found herself in the unusual position of having a suspect who was neither nervous nor evasive, but whose very calmness seemed suspicious. During the questioning, Santos noticed several things about Sarah that didn't fit the profile of a typical street criminal. Her vocabulary was extensive and precise. Her posture remained military straight throughout the interview. Most notably, when Santos mentioned certain procedures or asked about her background, Sarah's responses suggested familiarity with law enforcement protocols that went beyond what a civilian should know. The convenience store owner, Mr. Chen, arrived at the station for a formal lineup identification. He had been going over the incident in his mind during the drive to the station, trying to solidify his memories of the robbery. The more he thought about it, the less certain he became about the suspect's appearance. The robbery had happened quickly, and his primary focus had been on protecting himself rather than memorizing details about the perpetrator. Santos arranged for a lineup that included Sarah and 5 other women of similar height, build, and coloring. The other participants were volunteers from the police department's civilian employee pool, all of whom had agreed to help with the identification process. Sarah stood in position number 4, maintaining the same calm demeanor she had displayed throughout the ordeal. Mr. Chen studied each woman carefully, taking his time to compare them with his memory of the robbery suspect. He asked to see the lineup from different angles and requested that each participant turn to show their profile. After several minutes of careful consideration, he pointed hesitantly toward position number 2, then changed his mind and indicated position number 6. Finally, he shook his head and admitted that he couldn't be certain about any of them. The failed identification created a significant problem for the prosecution of the case. Without a positive identification from the victim, and with only circumstantial evidence linking Sarah to the crime, Detective Santos knew that building a solid case would be extremely difficult. She returned to the interrogation room with new questions and a growing suspicion that there was much more to Sarah's story than met the eye. Santos decided to take a different approach. Instead of focusing solely on the robbery, she began asking broader questions about Sarah's background, employment, and recent travel. She was particularly interested in the consulting work that Sarah claimed to do, especially given the vague nature of her responses about specific clients or projects. Sarah found herself in an increasingly difficult position. She couldn't provide detailed information about her work without revealing classified military operations, but her vague responses were clearly raising more suspicions. She considered requesting a lawyer, but she also knew that military legal representation might be more appropriate for her situation, assuming she could eventually prove her identity and status. The interrogation was interrupted when Sergeant Rodriguez knocked on the door. She had been reviewing the case file and had some questions about the physical evidence. Specifically, she wanted to know more about the tattoo that had been mentioned in the witness description. The convenience store's security camera had captured a brief glimpse of the suspect's arm, and there appeared to be some kind of marking visible. Detective Santos asked Sarah about any tattoos she might have. Sarah hesitated for a moment, knowing that revealing her tattoos would expose more about her background than she had wanted to share. However, she also realized that this might be an opportunity to begin clarifying her identity without fully compromising her military status. Sarah slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing a portion of an intricate tattoo on her forearm. The design was unlike anything Detective Santos had seen before. It wasn't the typical artwork associated with street gangs or civilian tattoo parlors. Instead, it appeared to be a complex military insignia with symbols and elements that suggested specialized training or elite unit membership. Santos studied the tattoo carefully, noting the precise craftsmanship and the professional quality of the work. She had seen enough military tattoos during her career to recognize the difference between amateur ink and the kind of artwork that military personnel typically received from experienced tattoo artists near military bases. This tattoo clearly fell into the latter category. The revelation of the tattoo marked a turning point in the investigation. Detective Santos realized that she was dealing with someone whose background was far more complex than she had initially assumed. She decided to make some phone calls to verify Sarah's identity through official channels, a decision that would soon bring an unexpected visitor to the police station. Admiral James Richardson had been in his office at the Naval Operations Center when his aide delivered an urgent message. One of his SEAL operatives had been detained by civilian police under suspicious circumstances, and her cover identity was at risk of being compromised. The Admiral dropped everything he was doing and immediately began making phone calls to understand the situation better. Richardson was a decorated veteran with 35 years of naval service behind him. He had overseen countless special operations and understood the delicate balance required to protect both his operatives and their missions. The idea that one of his SEALs had been arrested on false charges was deeply concerning, not just for the individual involved, but for the potential security implications. Within an hour of learning about Sarah's arrest, Admiral Richardson was in his staff car heading toward the downtown police station. He traveled with minimal entourage, accompanied only by his aide and a military legal officer. The Admiral believed in handling delicate situations with discretion and personal attention, rather than overwhelming displays of military authority. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Detective Santos was growing more frustrated with the case. Her attempts to verify Sarah's background through normal channels had yielded limited results. The consulting company that Sarah claimed to work for existed, but it appeared to be a front organization with minimal public information available. Phone calls to verify employment were being redirected through various numbers, and no one seemed able to provide straight answers about Sarah's status. Sarah remained in the holding area, still handcuffed and growing increasingly uncomfortable with the prolonged detention. She knew that her absence would eventually be noticed by her military contacts, but she had hoped to resolve the situation before it reached that point. The involvement of her command structure would create complications that could affect her future assignments and operational security. Sergeant Rodriguez was reviewing the case file when the front desk officer announced that a high-ranking military official was requesting to speak with someone in charge regarding a detained suspect. The description of the visitor included references to naval insignia and an authoritative demeanor that suggested someone of significant importance. Admiral Richardson entered the police station with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, and his presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the vicinity. The desk sergeant quickly called for Sergeant Rodriguez, recognizing that this situation was above his pay grade. When Sergeant Rodriguez met Admiral Richardson, she was immediately struck by his professional demeanor and obvious concern for the situation. He introduced himself and explained that he needed to speak with the officers handling the case of a woman who had been arrested that morning. His tone was respectful but carried an underlying urgency that suggested the matter was of significant importance. Detective Santos was called to meet with the Admiral, and she quickly briefed him on the circumstances of Sarah's arrest and the investigation that had followed. Richardson listened carefully, asking specific questions about the evidence and the identification procedures that had been used. His questions revealed a deep understanding of law enforcement processes and legal procedures. The Admiral requested permission to see the detained suspect, explaining that he needed to verify her identity for security purposes. His request was granted and he was escorted to the holding area where Sarah was waiting. The moment their eyes met, there was an immediate recognition of mutual respect and shared understanding. Sarah stood at attention despite her handcuffs, and Admiral Richardson nodded approvingly at her maintained military bearing, even under difficult circumstances. Their conversation was brief and professional, conducted in a way that confirmed Sarah's identity without revealing specific operational details to the civilian officers present. After speaking with Sarah, Admiral Richardson asked to examine her tattoo more closely. Detective Santos accompanied him, curious about what the military official might see that she had missed. When Sarah rolled up her sleeve to reveal the full tattoo, the Admiral's reaction was immediate and definitive. The tattoo was not just any military insignia. It was a highly specialized design that could only be earned through completion of specific training programs and operational assignments. The elements of the tattoo told a story of elite qualification, successful missions, and specialized skills that were possessed by only a select few individuals within the military. Admiral Richardson turned to Detective Santos and Sergeant Rodriguez with a mixture of authority and diplomatic tact. He explained that they had detained a highly decorated Navy SEAL who had recently returned from classified operations overseas. Her arrest on false charges was not only unjust, but potentially harmful to ongoing national security operations. The revelation sent shockwaves through the police station. Officers who had been treating Sarah as a common criminal suddenly realized they had been dealing with an elite military operative whose service record likely included actions that most people could only imagine. The contrast between her unremarkable civilian appearance and her extraordinary professional background was striking. Sergeant Rodriguez immediately ordered Sarah's handcuffs to be removed and began the process of releasing her from custody. The false arrest would require significant paperwork and internal review, but the priority was to correct the misunderstanding as quickly as possible. Admiral Richardson's presence had transformed the situation from a routine criminal case into a matter of military protocol and interagency cooperation. Detective Santos found herself apologizing to Sarah for the misunderstanding, while also expressing her admiration for Sarah's service to the country. She had encountered many suspects during her career, but she had never arrested someone whose background was so dramatically different from their initial appearance. The convenience store robbery remained unsolved, but it was clear that Sarah had been wrongly accused. Security footage from nearby businesses would later reveal the actual perpetrator, a woman who resembled Sarah only in the most general physical characteristics. The real robber was apprehended 2 days later, vindicating Sarah completely and highlighting the dangers of relying too heavily on witness descriptions. As the paperwork was being processed for Sarah's release, Admiral Richardson took the opportunity to speak privately with the senior police officials about the importance of proper identification, procedures, and the potential complications that could arise from similar misunderstandings in the future. His goal was not to criticize but to educate and prevent similar incidents. The atmosphere in the police station had completely transformed from the tension and suspicion that had marked the beginning of the day. Officers who had viewed Sarah with skepticism now looked at her with genuine respect and curiosity. The revelation of her true identity as a Navy SEAL had shifted everyone's perspective dramatically, creating an entirely new dynamic in the room. Admiral Richardson took the time to explain to the gathered officers exactly what Sarah's tattoo represented. Each element of the intricate design corresponded to specific achievements and qualifications that were earned through years of rigorous training and dangerous missions. The trident symbol indicated her completion of basic underwater demolition SEAL training, one of the most challenging military programs in existence. Detective Santos listened with fascination as the Admiral described the selection process for Navy SEALs. Only a small percentage of candidates who began the training actually completed it successfully. The physical demands were extreme, but the mental challenges were equally difficult. Sarah had not only completed this training but had excelled in it, earning recognition for her exceptional performance. The officers learned that Sarah's recent overseas assignments had involved counter-terrorism operations in regions where American military presence was highly sensitive. Her work had directly contributed to preventing attacks against civilian targets and had helped disrupt international criminal networks. The impact of her service extended far beyond what most people would ever know or understand. Sergeant Rodriguez found herself reflecting on the assumptions she had made about Sarah based on her appearance. The quiet woman in civilian clothes had seemed unremarkable, even suspicious when viewed through the lens of a criminal investigation. Now, knowing about her background and achievements, Rodriguez realized how much courage and dedication it must have taken for Sarah to maintain her cover identity while enduring false accusation and arrest. Sarah's behavior throughout the ordeal began to make perfect sense in this new context. Her calm demeanor under pressure, her cooperative attitude with law enforcement, and her disciplined responses during questioning were all consistent with her military training. What had seemed suspicious to the officers was actually evidence of the professional composure that had made her successful in high-stress combat situations. The Admiral shared some general information about the challenges faced by female SEALs, particularly regarding the additional scrutiny and higher standards they often encountered. Sarah had not only met these challenges but had surpassed them, earning the respect of her male colleagues and superiors through her performance rather than her gender. Her achievements were particularly noteworthy given the barriers she had overcome. Officer Johnson, who had made the initial arrest, approached Sarah to offer a personal apology. He explained that he had been responding to the pressure to solve the robbery case quickly and had allowed that urgency to cloud his judgment. Sarah accepted his apology graciously, understanding that law enforcement officers face difficult decisions under pressure, much like military personnel in combat situations. Detective Santos was particularly impressed by Sarah's handling of the interrogation process. Knowing what she knew now about Sarah's background, Santos realized that Sarah could have easily revealed information that would have intimidated or impressed her questioners. Instead, Sarah had maintained operational security and protected classified information even while facing false charges. This level of professionalism was rare in Santos's experience. The Admiral addressed the broader implications of the incident, emphasizing the importance of proper identification procedures when dealing with military personnel. He explained that many service members, particularly those involved in special operations, maintained civilian cover identities for security reasons. This meant that their true backgrounds might not be immediately apparent through standard identification checks. A discussion developed about the challenges of balancing national security, concerns with local law enforcement needs, Admiral Richardson acknowledged the difficult position that police officers faced when encountering individuals whose backgrounds were protected by classification requirements. He suggested that improved communication protocols between military and civilian authorities could help prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. Sarah finally had the opportunity to call her friend Lisa to explain why she had missed their planned meeting. The conversation was complicated by her inability to reveal the full details of what had happened, requiring her to craft an explanation that protected both her cover identity and the reputation of the police officers involved. Lisa was understanding but clearly confused by the vague explanation she received. The paperwork required to officially clear Sarah's arrest record was extensive, involving both police administrative procedures and military security protocols. Admiral Richardson's legal officer worked with the police department's legal team to ensure that the incident was properly documented and that Sarah's record was completely cleared of any criminal charges or suspicions. News of the incident began to spread through the police station, creating a buzz of interest and discussion among officers who had not been directly involved. Many of them had never encountered a Navy SEAL in person, and the opportunity to meet Sarah and learn about her service generated considerable excitement and respect throughout the department. The convenience store owner, Mr. Chen, was informed about the resolution of his case and the fact that the woman who had been arrested was innocent of any wrongdoing. He expressed relief that an innocent person had not been wrongly convicted, while also hoping that the real perpetrator would be caught soon. His experience highlighted the challenges that crime victims faced in making accurate identifications under stressful circumstances. As the formal processes were completed, Admiral Richardson prepared to escort Sarah back to the Naval Operations Center for debriefing and to assess any potential security implications from the incident. The exposure of her identity to civilian authorities would require evaluation and possible adjustments to her cover status for future assignments. Before leaving the police station, Sarah took the time to thank Detective Santos and Sergeant Rodriguez for their professionalism in handling the situation once her true identity had been revealed. She understood that they had been doing their jobs under difficult circumstances, and she held no resentment about the misunderstanding that had occurred. The incident would become a learning experience for everyone involved, highlighting the complex relationships between military operations and civilian law enforcement in an increasingly interconnected security environment. 3 months after the incident at the police station, Detective Maria Santos received an invitation that surprised her. The Naval Operations Center was hosting a ceremony to recognize civilians who had shown exceptional professionalism in their interactions with military personnel. Santos had been nominated for her handling of Sarah's case, particularly her thorough investigation that ultimately helped reveal the truth. The ceremony took place in an impressive auditorium filled with military personnel, government officials, and civilian guests. Santos felt somewhat out of place in her civilian clothes among all the dress uniforms, but she was deeply honored to be recognized. As she looked around the room, she spotted Sarah sitting in the front row, wearing her formal Navy uniform with its array of ribbons and decorations. Admiral Richardson served as the ceremony's host, and during his opening remarks, he spoke about the importance of cooperation between military and civilian authorities. He used Sarah's case as an example of how misunderstandings could occur, but also how professional behavior on all sides could lead to positive outcomes. The incident had become a teaching moment for both communities. When Santos was called forward to receive her recognition, Admiral Richardson described how her investigation had been thorough and fair, even when dealing with a suspect whose background was initially mysterious. He emphasized that Santos had treated Sarah with respect throughout the process, never allowing frustration or pressure to compromise her professional standards. This approach had made the eventual resolution much smoother. Sarah had the opportunity to speak briefly about her experience from the perspective of someone who had been wrongly accused. She praised the professionalism of Detective Santos and acknowledged the difficult position that law enforcement officers faced when dealing with incomplete information. Her words carried weight because of her unique perspective as both a service member and someone who had been through the civilian justice system. The incident had led to several positive changes in procedures and protocols. The police department had implemented new training programs to help officers recognize signs that a suspect might have a military background that required special consideration. These programs didn't compromise law enforcement effectiveness, but provided additional tools for handling complex situations. Similarly, the military had developed better protocols for supporting service members who found themselves involved with civilian law enforcement while maintaining their cover identities. A discrete communication system had been established to allow for faster verification of military status when necessary, while still protecting operational security. Sarah's commanding officer shared some general information about her subsequent assignments, noting that she had continued to serve with distinction despite the challenges of the false arrest incident. Her ability to maintain operational security under extreme pressure had actually enhanced her reputation within the special operations community. The incident had become an example used in training exercises. Officer Johnson, who had made the initial arrest, attended the ceremony as a guest. He had volunteered for additional training programs focused on avoiding premature judgments and improving identification procedures. His willingness to learn from the mistake had earned him respect from his supervisors and had actually advanced his career rather than hindering it. Sergeant Rodriguez had been promoted partly based on her handling of the situation once Admiral Richardson had arrived at the station. Her ability to quickly adapt to changing circumstances and coordinate between military and civilian authorities had demonstrated leadership qualities that her superiors valued. She now served as a liaison officer for military-related cases. The real convenience store robber had been caught 2 weeks after Sarah's arrest, thanks in part to improved security camera analysis and better witness interview techniques. The actual perpetrator bore only a superficial resemblance to Sarah, highlighting how witness descriptions could be unreliable under stressful circumstances. This arrest had validated the decision to release Sarah and had closed the case definitively. Mr. Chen, the convenience store owner, had implemented additional security measures in his store and had also attended training sessions about working with law enforcement during investigations. He learned about the challenges of making accurate identifications and the importance of being honest about uncertainty rather than feeling pressured to make definitive statements. The incident had broader implications for the community's understanding of military service members who lived and worked among them. Many people learned for the first time about the extent to which special operations personnel maintained civilian identities for security reasons. This awareness led to greater appreciation for the sacrifices made by service members and their families. Local news media had covered the story in general terms, focusing on the positive resolution and the cooperation between different agencies. The coverage avoided specific details that could compromise security, but highlighted the professionalism shown by all parties involved. The story became an example of how mistakes could be corrected through good faith efforts and mutual respect. Sarah continued her military career with a new perspective on the challenges faced by civilian law enforcement. She had gained first-hand experience of the pressures and split-second decisions that police officers faced daily. This understanding proved valuable in her subsequent assignments that involved coordination with civilian authorities in various locations around the world. The tattoo that had ultimately revealed Sarah's identity became a symbol of the hidden stories that existed all around the community. Many people realized that they might encounter individuals whose backgrounds and service were far more significant than their everyday appearances suggested. This awareness fostered greater respect for the quiet heroes who served in various capacities. Detective Santos kept the commendation she received prominently displayed in her office, not as a symbol of personal achievement, but as a reminder of the importance of thorough, fair investigation. She shared the story with new detectives as an example of how assumptions could be dangerous, and how truth often emerged through careful, professional work. Years later, both Sarah and Detective Santos would look back on the incident as a pivotal moment in their respective careers. For Sarah, it reinforced the importance of maintaining her cover, while also showing her that civilian authorities could be trusted to handle sensitive situations professionally when properly informed. For Santos, it became a defining case that shaped her approach to investigation and her understanding of the diverse community she served. The legacy of that morning's misunderstanding became a testament to the power of professionalism, mutual respect, and the willingness to learn from mistakes. It demonstrated that even when systems failed, individual integrity and good faith efforts could transform potential disasters into opportunities for growth and understanding.